Good morning. The time now is 10 o'clock. I'd like to greet you all this morning. Welcome to session 4 of the UNCTAD and SADC Parliamentary Forum training. Honorable members of Parliament, Her Excellency Ms. Buyema Sokhoma, the SADC PF Secretary General, and all SADC PF staff, representatives of the UNCTAD, SADC PF, the staff of SADC Parliaments. Before we begin, please allow me to make a few housekeeping announcements. Honorable members, please ensure that your microphones are on mute at all times. We have interpretation. Please note that we have 3 official languages of the SADC PF, namely English, French, and Portuguese. To participate in the meeting in your language of choice, please click on the interpretation icon and select your preferred language and click mute on the original audio. Please note that the meeting is being recorded as part of the journals of the SADC Parliamentary Forum in line with the rules of procedure of the SADC Parliamentary Forum. When communicating, if you wish to speak, please click on the react icon, or you can type in the chat box. Please also make sure that your cameras are well situated before you speak. Honorable members, before we start, I would like to invite our Secretary General, Ms. Buyema Sokhoma, to give us a few words to open session 4 of this meeting. Ms. Buyema Sokhoma, please take the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director of Ceremonies, for the introductory guidance that you've given us. And let me start by appreciating our honorable members who have joined us this morning. Our honorable member and chairperson of the Trade and Industry, Finance and Investment Committee, Honorable Ruth Mendes, our distinguished partners and representatives from UNCTAD, colleagues from the SADC Parliamentary Forum, staff from national parliaments, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed my sincere pleasure to be joining you this morning and to deliver these few remarks. I would like to also commit the SADC Parliamentary Forum or restate the SADC Parliamentary Forum's commitment to this discourse and the sessions that have been unfolding since last year. Honorable members, as you are well aware, at the SADC level, several initiatives are already in place to promote regional trade. Several resolutions have been taken by the highest policy-making body, being the Plenary Assembly, including member states engaging in lifting of tariff and non-tariff barriers within the scope of the trade in goods within the SADC countries. Yet, although regional trade within the SADC has improved over the last decades, we find that individual SADC member states remain high importing countries with significant trade deficits with other countries outside Africa. For instance, honorable members, the trade deficit with the EU, India, China, and the United States are important for most of our SADC countries. Honorable members, in addition, the region continues to rely on the last lifelines of international trade. With the timid extension of the US-Africa Growth Opportunity Act, AGOA, up to the end of 2026, giving the region a moratorium to leapfrog ahead and benefit from fading preferential rates. Honourable members, the high trade deficit means that within the SADC region, countries are not producing enough commodities that are consumed locally. It means, honourable members, that we cannot produce locally what we consume, including soft drinks, toothpaste, soap, detergent, clothing, and sometimes even the most basic of commodities. You may be astonished, honourable members, to know that island states in SADC surrounded by the sea still import at least partly fish and shrimp products from other countries. To reduce prices, brands normally resort to cost-cutting measures, such as bottling or assembling at national level, to reduce the perception of unbridled importation and create a sense of national ownership. Honourable members, yet beyond the chimeric effect of domestic or regional production, the reality is still that over 70% of consumables are imported from outside of Africa, from goods, from food, juice boxes, to smartphones and vehicles. Honourable members, we are yet to see the first branded smartphone, the first branded car, or even the first branded television set, which is entirely produced from Africa. For this situation to cease, the demands of consumption and the ability of production must match. Honourable members, in addition, regional trade must be facilitated, both for raw materials and finished products. The baseline point to facilitate regional trade is to ensure that there are no barriers for movement of goods and services, such that ideologically the goods move without any hindrance from one place to the other, just as they would move within the same country. Honourable members, as we zero in on today's theme, digital trade and electronic payments are thus a catalyst to achieve this objective of promoting seamless regional or international trade. Checks, bills of exchange, promissory notes, or other paper-based methods which require bank clearances are clogs in the system, which have been contributory factors to deter intra-Africa trade for too long. In a modern world of QR codes or scan-to-pay facilities, internet banking or online banking, and widespread commercial platforms for trade, Africa too must join the fray and partake in the benefits of e-commerce. I must admit that in this area, we are making progress. The AfCFTA Protocol on Digital Trade emphasizes on the security of transactions and the need to ensure that trade continues efficiently with online payment methods. The protocol seeks to promote digital trade and its use in diverse transactions and the acquisitions of a variety of products, especially those which are to be exported after payment. The protocol also considers at Article 9 that different means of online payment authentications can be effected, including the digital signatures, and leaving open new measures such as electronic biometrics, which would depend on domestic rules. Honourable members, the SADC Parliamentary Forum is also cognizant that digital trade is also a deterrent for money laundering and financing of terrorism, since it leaves a banking trail which can be counter-verified and audited. Honourable members, may we continue to rely on our model law on public financial management in this regard. To operationalize digital trade, we realize that parliaments have a significant role to play in harmonizing national law to enable electronic payments. These include upgrading data protection laws, banking laws, and the law on electronic transactions and payments. It is only through enabling laws that individuals and companies will be able to secure imports and plan exports. Real-time movement of money in the gold standard, yet its implementation would no doubt require harmonious legislation adopted by trading countries. Furthermore, laws must also be strengthened in the domain of cyber criminality to deter identity theft, hacking, phishing, and other cyber crimes. Honorable members, parliaments must also empower financial institutions and regulations, such as the central bank, to issue digital currencies, which are safe, verifiable, and can be exchanged with certainty without loss of value. I'd also like to encourage honorable members to look at our PFM model law, where we refer to cryptocurrencies. But that is not all, honorable members. In addition, Parliament, in domesticating the protocol on digital trade, will also need to empower banks and the banking business by offering them incentives to shift their transactions online. Digital trade comes first of all with digital banking. This would require robust digital infrastructure with 5G fast internet so that the domestic market creates a permanent demand which makes the transaction to online banking worthwhile for country-to-country transactions. In turn, parliaments need to provide incentives for smartphones use, which can facilitate internet banking while being cheaper than laptops or other computer systems. This also means that mobile applications must speak with payment protocols such as MasterCard, Visa, so that these can be registered in the mobile applications to make online payments. In other words, digital trade will only pick up if the country has migrated to the digital age. Without a digital logistics base, countries will not have sufficient users to digital trade for a competitive difference to be made. More than ever, we must break down the integral steps for digital trade and not miss the one step which would render obsolete the whole system. Honorable members and distinguished participants, in this respect, it is imperative for countries to consider the digitalization of all goods individually. To put this into perspective, it would be useless if in making a child's toy car, the purchase of the screws can be made by digital trade, but not the wheels. The absence of one raw material can clog the whole system, especially in assembling raw materials from different countries with different rules. Therefore, I would encourage participants today and honorable members to continue working with SADC parliaments to domesticate the protocol on digital trade and harmonize the rules for electronic transactions. I'd like to end, honorable members, by saying that we are pushed to see the next African Temu or Amazon, which represents the zenith of online transactions facilitation. We can only improve if we set ourselves high ambitions and work towards the accomplishment of same. Africa has a digital gap to fill. At the same time as other countries are already moving at inebriated speeds with fintech solutions powered with artificial intelligence to promote digital trade, the upskilling that is required for Africa should be a constant one that is regularly reassessed. For this reason, the forum calls for a dedicated parliamentary committee on digitalization, which should work in tandem with the Trade and Investment Committee at the national level to constantly review the gaps in technology and AI as we advance to promote digital trade. If change is now, we must embrace it and surf on the waves of opportunities which technology bequeaths to Africa. With these words, Honorable Member, I thank you for your kind listening and would like to wish you fruitful deliberations in the next few hours. Thank you very much.
We thank you so much to the Secretary General for laying down the trajectory of the SADC region from how we trade with one another, as we know that most of our countries really don't manufacture. We have the capacity to assemble, we have the capacity to put together what we have imported, and also we don't do intra-regional trade. And also she talked about the barriers to trade and how digital trade can be a catalyst to intra-regional trade. She also talked about how honorable members can be instrumental in leaning on the SADC model in parliamentary the SADC model in the financial side, how they can use the model law in leaning on money laundering, because the digital side can be an easy way for money laundering, and how the model law can be used to strengthen cyber laws, and how it can be used to strengthen cryptocurrency, and how the model law can be used to strengthen the financial side in our countries, in terms of the banking, in terms of the lenders. We thank you, SG, for really laying down the foundation for this training session, session 4. And I'd like to move on to our first speaker. I've seen that Mr. Simon Marvel has joined us. Before he can take the floor, I'd like to give a little bio on him. Mr. Simon Marvel is an economic affairs officer in the African Trade Policy Center within the Regional Integration and Trade Division in the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Mr. Marvel has 20 years experience assessing trade and environmental reforms focused on development issues. He has authored over 40 publications. He has also designed and led numerous capacity building programs on trade policy analysis across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Mr. Marvel has twice awarded the Global Trade Analysis Project Research Fellow distinction from 2020 to 2023 and 2024 to 2027. He holds a PhD in international economics. Mr. Simon Marvel, you have the floor. Please continue.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I hope you can see my screen. I'm trying to bring it full size. Can you please confirm that you are able to see it?
We see you, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Excellencies, honorable members of the SADC Parliamentary Forums and colleagues from UNCTAD. I want to start by thanking you to having us, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, today on this session on digital trade. As you can see from the slide, we actually have been doing a fair amount of work at the ECA on digital trade over the past few years. And now we are actually compiling all that work into a synthesis report on digital trade in Africa. In fact, the work on the synthesis report is still ongoing, and it's quite comprehensive. So with the time that we have, I will really be focusing on the key highlights coming out of the report. So the main findings from the analysis. Here, it's really just to start to set the scene, providing a little information based on fuse to give a sense of Africa's digital trade performance today, and also by comparing that with other main regions. Here we are looking at three key indicators. You can see three bars for each of the regions. And if we focus on Africa, we can see that the first bar, that is for the digitally deliverable services. This is where Africa is doing relatively better than in the other type of digital trade, but it's still lagging behind all of the main regions. Just for information, the digitally deliverable services or those services that are produced and consumed 100% online. You can think, for example, about the streaming of the movies online using a platform like Netflix. So this is what we are looking at, and Africa actually is trading significantly in that specific digital mean, but still lagging behind other regions. Then we move to the second bar, which is much lower and lower again than everyone else except Oceania. And this is for the information on communication technology, ICT services again. That are the services that help to support digital trade business operations. So you can think of software, Microsoft, Office, Windows. And then the last one, last category, which is actually the lowest, that's the ICT goods. So those are the physical goods that would ultimately enable digital activities. So like the hardware, so computers, mobile phones, this is the kind of trade that we are looking at here. Something that is very important, there are two main components in digital trade, and they go hand in hand. You have the infrastructure, and those are obviously critical, and then you have the regulations. They are equally important because you can actually have a very good infrastructure, but if you don't have the proper regulation, you may not maximize the use of your infrastructure. We can take the example of payment system. So that's an infrastructure, but if you don't have the proper regulation to protect the consumer who are going to be using the payment system, then you may not be able to make fully use of the payment system. There will be no incentive for the consumer to go and make payment online if they feel that they are not properly protected. So now focusing first on the digital infrastructure performance on the continent, again, in comparison with other main regions, two aspects here that we looked at very briefly that you may already know, access of internet to internet, and then electricity, access to electricity. So in both, Africa is lagging behind again. The access to internet for Africa as a whole is about 38%, and electricity is slightly more than half of the population that actually have access, African population that have access to electricity. And again, electricity would enable the use of most of the digital technologies and facilitate digital infrastructure progress. Now, I think it's important to go even beyond that. If we focus on the internet access, 38% on average for the continent, but in fact, that is greatly across countries. So you have a country like Somalia, where barely 2% of the population have access to internet. And on the opposite spectrum, a country like Morocco, where over 90% of the population have access to internet. Within countries, we also see a lot of about a quarter of the people in Africa living in rural areas only. Only a quarter of the people living in rural areas in Africa have access to internet, but more than 2/3 of the people living in urban areas are connected to the internet. Similarly, we see that around a third of female are connected to internet within the continent, and that is much less than the male, which is close to 50% of the male living on the continent that actually have access to internet. Moving on the right-hand side of the slide, you see a map of the continent, and here we have just displayed the data center. What are the data center? What is the coverage of the data center across the continent? And data center are really a critical part of digital infrastructure. They are a physical location that actually is computing infrastructure, like the servers, the network equipment, physical storage drives. And here again, although it has increased substantially over the last 3 years, in 2023, there were only 105 data centers that were on the continent, and that was only 2% of the total data center worldwide. It has increased a lot. It more than doubled, 249 as of last week. And but it's still low because it has also increased everywhere else in the world. So it has increased slightly in proportion. Today, 3% of the world's data centers are located in Africa. But of course, that's not sufficient if Africa really wants to make use of the digital tools and have the proper digital infrastructure. Now, moving to the regulation, the infrastructure are critical, but the regulation also are. A lot of organizations are actually focusing on infrastructure, and so we thought that for us it would make sense to actually look more in detail at the regulatory landscape. And so what we did is that we launched an initiative with our sister commissions, ECLAC, that's the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. ESCAP is the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and so ourselves ECA covering Africa. So we were able to use the similar methodology. We worked with the European University Institute, UI, and we collected, compiled, and analyzed data for the entire continent. So we covered all the 54 African countries. Again, as you certainly know, 54 African countries, member of the UN, 55 AU, African Union members. That's the differentiation that is being made here. And so we collected the data for all the 54 African countries that are member of the ECA. And that allowed us to really have a good mapping of the regulatory landscape across the continent and also how countries seems to be performing. So for that, we created in the indices, which I will come back on in a few minutes. That looks at two different aspects, but we'll go more into details after, and essentially to measure performance of African countries across two different dimensions of digital trade and focusing on the regulatory framework. And the whole point of that has been to support member states throughout the negotiation of the AFCFTA Digital Trade Protocol. The AFCFTA Secretariat called upon ECA to provide capacity building to the negotiation of the protocol throughout the negotiation. And so here, what you see on the graphs below is we are again comparing Africa with the other main regions in two dimensions, because you have two types of regulation. Essentially, you have the regulations that would be to digital trade. So I could mention, for example, come back again on the idea of having a framework in place for data protection, adopting the UN Commission on International Trade Law, UNCTAD on electronic signature. The Secretary General mentioned that in her intervention, enforcing copyrights online. So those are enabling measures. Been able to identify 65 measures, 23 that we found testing with the European University Institute that would be enabling, and 42 that would be restrictive. So restrictive measure could include tariffs on ICT goods, internet shutdowns that a country could decide to implement for a certain period of time, local presence requirement for digital service. So that is to give you really the difference. Again, there is no really, we cannot say that regulations are good and bad. They are there for a reason, but some are enabling and some are restrictive. So ultimately, what the objective would be is, in the context of digital trade, we would want to tackle those restrictive measures that undermine most digital trade, and then favor those enabling measures that support best digital trade. And so here what you see is that when it comes to enabling measure, Africa is doing quite well. Africa is actually not having many enabling measures. Africa is performing poorly. But when it comes to the restrictive one, it's somewhere in the middle. But this is also because we find relatively less regulations within the continent than in other regions. So again, Africa is not overly restricting digital trade, but it has very few enabling measures in place, which I think is a very important message to keep in mind for the rest of the presentation. What we have done is that we have made available that data freely on a dedicated platform. So this is just to show you what is the landing page of that platform. And you have an Africa segment, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean. You can go within each of them, and then you will get very detailed information on what is being covered, what information have been collected, what are the two indexes that I talked about briefly, which I'm going to go into now, and how countries are performing, why. So you can see that, and we have a lot of publications also that you can find within that platform, which again, that's what we're doing now. We are combining them into a synthesis report. So the first index is the Regional Digital Trade Integration Index that we built jointly with, again, ECA, ECLAC, and ESCAP. And it's to measure any progress toward regional digital trade integration. So here we really want to see to what extent the regulatory environment of the continent, Africa as a whole, if you look at the global score, or each of the countries within Africa, how that regulatory environment impede or not regional digital trade integration. Those 65 measures that I mentioned, some are enabling, some are restrictive, and we score them differently. So essentially, we give 0 whenever the measure reveals a policy environment that is conducive to digital trade, that favor digital trade, and 1 would be a score that actually impede substantially digital trade. We have put all those 65 measures within 12 pillars. I'll not go through all of them. I'm sure you will have the presentation, and you also have the link of the website if you want to go more into detail. But just to give you a couple of examples, Pillar 1 is essentially around the tariffs on ICT goods. Pillar 9, for example, is on the content access. Pillar 12, online sales and transaction. So each of the pillars cover a specific category of regulation around digital trade in the regional framework. And within each of them, you have then specific measures, 65 if you add them across the 12 pillars. And so here is just the overall score for Africa. What we see is that across the 54 countries, there is a lot of disparities between Lesotho, that overall seems to be least restrictive to digital trade integration, and Egypt, who seems to be most restrictive to digital trade integration. So let's say between Angola and Lesotho, if we focus just on the SADC countries, which are represented by the green bars here, there is a lot of disparity. And in fact, SADC is not doing so badly, because you see that a lot of countries outside of SADC are found on the left-hand side of Angola, meaning that they are performing in average worse than Angola. This again is an average. We do have 21 including 2 from SADC, Angola and DRC, that do a bit worse than the Africa continental average, and then all the rest, 19 countries that do relatively better. But one should not stop there, because of course the overall score is just an indication of the overall performance, but it doesn't reveal why is that? And so you need to dig deeper into that. So here, let's focus on Angola and Lesotho from the SADC region, the worst best performer overall. But again, you see that even in Angola, when you look into the specific pillars and indicators, the various 65 measures that I mentioned, you could see that Angola is actually doing quite well when it comes to content access on standards and procedures, and doing very okay on domestic data protection and privacy, which you will see later in the presentation. That's our 2 critical pillars for digital trade and integration on the continent, but not doing so well in most of the other measures. And this is why, on average, it's a bit worse off, but there are areas where Angola is doing well. In the case of Lesotho, there are areas, even if Lesotho seems to be the best performer here, there are areas where Lesotho doesn't do well on internet intermediary liability. So meaning that there is a lack of safe harbor for copyright infringement activities. On online sale transaction, also Lesotho is not doing so well. There is a lack of legal framework for online consumer protection. It is not also part of the UNCTAD model law on e-commerce and e-signature. So those are areas where there is progress to be made for Lesotho to do better, but overall, Lesotho is doing quite well, but areas for improvement. Now, this is what we did is that we actually used the information that we have collected for all the 54 countries, and then we undertook empirical analysis. So I'm not going to go into the technicality. We use what we call gravity modeling. So it's a specific model, econometric model, where we tested a number of hypotheses. And I think there are 3 key findings that we wanted to highlight here that are very important. The first one, the finding is the number of the restrictions and the intensity of the restrictions matter very differently. So what we tested using the RDTI score, so the index that I just presented to you very briefly. What we see is that if you reduce the number of restrictive measures from the index by 1%, you will only get an increase of intra-African digital trade by 0.25%. But if you are able to actually reduce the score itself by 1%, so the intensity of the restrictive measures or of the restrictions within the regulatory environment of the African continent, then you can actually boost intra-African trade by over 20% from our estimates. Now, what we looked at is also what are the low-hanging fruit. We have 12 pillars, which I briefly mentioned. And we see that 8, which is a big number, 8 out of the 12 pillars actually show a very significant positive impact if they are being addressed to boost intra-African trade. And the 3 pillars that show really positive impact, both in terms of the number of restrictions if they are addressed and in terms of the intensity of the restriction as well, that would be the priority ones to tackle. So public procurement, it's important to mention that public procurement is a bit outside of the scope of the AFCFTA, but it's still something that is very important in the digital trade sphere. Domestic data protection and privacy, and also a critical areas that needs attention on the continent, and then in the areas of standards. So I'll come back on those to really explain what is driving that. And then we tested again all the 12 pillars, and we looked at, okay, with the AFCFTA, continental integration, what also would make sense is to look at what is worth harmonizing, which regulations are more worth harmonizing within the continent. And what stands out is that harmonizing regulation around cross-border data across Africa is really what would be meaningful to boost intra-African digital trade. Moving briefly to the next index, and I will try to go quickly because I'm not sure how long more I have, but I'll be as brief as I can. This is the second type of index. The first one was looking at the regulatory integration of the continent in both goods and services. And here we are looking just at services themselves. So we focus on those digital services trade restrictions. And we work on that with the OECD. The OECD developed the Trade Restrictiveness Index, the DSTRI. And before we started the work, only one country was covered from the continent in the OECD DSTRI, that was South Africa. But now we have been able to cover all the 54 countries, and of course, including all the SADC countries as well. Here again, we measure the extent to which the regulatory environment affects digital services trade in a country, within a specific pillar in that country, or even overall across the 5 pillars. Here we have 5 pillars, 5 policy areas. Infrastructure and connectivity, so that could be, for example, restrictions to telecom network, electronic transaction, that could be regulation to e-commerce, payment system, so around the cross-border data transfer, but data flows and management. And then the Pillar 4, intellectual property rights, we would be more looking here at recording, motion pictures, how those are protected, how the copyright are protected for those type of digital means. And then the last one is a broader category, that's all the rest, and that encompasses like the limited online advertisements, for instance. And here the same, 0 would indicate conducive environment, and 1 a restrictive environment to digitally enabled services. Again, that's the overall picture for the 54 countries on the continent, with the SADC countries highlighted in a stronger color. And what you see, even more disparity than what we observed for the previous index. Here, out of the 24 countries, we have 24 countries, sorry, that score over the average for the continent, and 10 from SADC that score above the average. And if you compare Somalia on the most restrictive side with Benin on the lowest restrictive side, there is a huge disparity. For most of the countries, not all, but most of them, 42 out of the 54, infrastructure and connectivity, not surprisingly, is where there is greatest attention that is required, that we find most restrictions. And interestingly, we collect that the information every year, and we are now updating data for 2024 and even 2025, but here we went until 2023 in what I am showing you. And over the last decade or so of the coverage period, we saw no improvement, or sometimes a decline in 30 countries when it comes to their digital trade regulatory environment in the areas of services. Here again, if we take SADC countries and we compare Tanzania, Namibia, just to say that, so Tanzania is not doing that well in 4 out of the 5 areas. Infrastructure and connectivity, we find restrictions on the use of communication services, for instance, electronic transaction. We see that it's impossible for non-resident foreign services provider to register and declare tax online. Payment system, the national payment security standard differ from the international ones. And then there are also limitations on online content, download and streaming. But when it comes to intellectual property rights, Tanzania is not doing so bad. And so there are areas that actually the country is doing well. Namibia, we only see restrictions in 2 areas out of the 5. Again, infrastructure and connectivity. There is very limited data protection and electronic transaction. The national contract rules for cross-border transaction from the international standard. So here again is we did the same type of empirical analysis, and we have 2 main findings. We see that those countries that share regional trade agreements and that have common language, and even interestingly, that have religious proximity, that seems to be a trust building factor. And all of them tend to show a strong potential for enhanced intra-digital services trade when they trade with each other within the continent. The second finding is if we look at the score and if we focus on the pillar that is the most having the most impact on the increase of intra-African trade, we see that again, if we reduce the DSTRI score in the infrastructure and connectivity pillar by 1%, then that could lead to an increase of almost 10% of intra-African digital trade. And infrastructure and connectivity, interestingly, is also very closely connected with the 5 priority sectors under the AFCFTA. So business, communication, transport, and travel. There is also financial, but financial link with it. So much, but the other 4 they do. And then what we try to do then is, what is actually the most important from that those data and those analyses when it comes to facilitating the implementation of the AFCFTA Digital Trade Protocol. What could be the issues that the countries within the provisions, the annexes of the protocol could consider prioritizing to have make most impact in terms of implementing the protocol provisions and then boosting intra-African digital trade. First, we find that there is a balance between cross-border data flow and data protection. And here, that's very important in the context of the protocol because there is an annex, an entire annex on cross-border data transfer. And the annex urges member states to allow cross-border data protection, but at the same time, of course, protect personal data. So here, regulation, you see, one is enabling, one is restrictive, but the restrictive one is actually ultimately leading to facilitating digital trade. So if you have regulation that protect personal data, you are going to stimulate transaction consumption online. Here, the challenge that we see from the data that we have collected is that there are 8 countries within SADC, Comoros, DRC, Namibia, and Seychelles that they do not have any data protection in place, at least by the time of the collection of the data. And at the same time, they don't have data protection, but they allow data flow to move freely across border. And this is problematic because you allow free flow of data across countries, but you don't have any data protection framework. So here really the recommendation is, again, based on the result that I mentioned earlier, there is a strong impact if regulation are harmonized on cross-border data transfer across the continent, and at the same time that a continental-wide framework for data protection is adopted. There is a reference in the protocol, and there is already a protection framework in place. That's the AU Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, but it's getting old. 2014, and digital trade is very dynamic, changing rapidly. So what was true 22 years ago, 12 years ago might not be true today. And in fact, only 19 countries from the continent have ratified it, and 15 have signed it, and only 15 ratified it. Then another challenge is we see that there is an urgent need to cooperate on standard, to prioritize mutual recognition of digital product certification, strengthen screening and testing requirement, and then look at encryption of standard to better protect data and privacy. I'll finish with yeah, let me continue. So those are really important in the protocol. They are referred in 3 specific articles. The challenge that we have here, the first challenge is the fact that we have 22 countries, including 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, Comoros, Madagascar, Namibia, Tanzania, South Africa, and Zimbabwe from SADC, that do not allow third-party certification from conformity assessment bodies. So the conformity assessment bodies are bodies that are that independently verify and process the alliance with industry standard and regulations. So here there are some solutions already, because there is the ISO, International Organization for Standardization, that exists, but then within the continent, ARSO, the African Organization for Standardization, has created the ARSO CERT. So ARSO certification, that's a third-party certification system that adopts similar rules than the ISO guide, but it still requires countries to become a member of ARSO CERT, to have the necessary laboratories and also have those laboratories accredited. So here it's really to encourage countries to build those laboratories. And the third country participation can be done through accredited bodies, and that will ensure quality standards of traded goods and services. And then the last challenge here is that we see that in 19 countries, data encryption algorithms are very different than the standard, the international standard. In SADC, Malawi, Namibia, South Africa, and Tanzania are in this situation. And here, I think one of the recommendations that we put forward is that there is an urgent need to strengthen the capacity of IT-related skills on the continent. That could include, of course, masters, dedicated education programs on building IT-related skills. So on that, thank you very much. And back to you, Madam Chair. I hope I didn't use too much of the time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mavo. Can we give him a round of applause, please, for his beautiful presentation? I found 2 issues quite interesting. The reduction in regulatory restrictiveness in infrastructure and connectivity, just a 1% reduction in restrictiveness could give a 9.3 increase in intra-Africa digital service trade. That was interesting. And also improvement in infrastructure and connectivity shows very strong impact on enhancing Africa's business, communication, transport, and travel services. And we have to find a balance between cross-border data flow and data protection. And there's a challenge that we still have countries, 3 countries in the SADC region. You highlighted the DRC, Namibia, and Seychelles, without any data protection frameworks, while allowing data flows across borders freely. And the recommendation that goes to members of parliament is strengthening legal frameworks and harmonizing regulations on cross-border data transfers, and adopting a continental-wide framework for data protection. Thank you so much, Mr. Mavo, for an informative presentation. Honorable members, at this juncture, I wish you would hold your questions. We will have a question and answer session after the next and last presentation. I would like to call upon the next presenter, Ms. Cecile Baraye. I hope I say that correctly. Thank you so much. Before you go on, may I please read your bio? Ms. Cecile Baraye is Chief of the Digital Economy Capacity Building section in the E-commerce and Digital Economy branch, Division of Technology and Logistics at UNCTAD. She oversees the technical assistance programs related to e-commerce and the digital economy. She joined UNCTAD in 1997, and she holds a Master of Science in International Law You have the floor, Mrs. Steele. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chair, and good afternoon to you, honorable members of Parliament and colleagues. So let me first share my screen. And you tell me if it's working correctly, if you can see it.
We can see the screen?
You can see it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So first, thank you for this opportunity to brief you today. It's a privilege for me. Maybe I should start saying that UN Trade and Development, known as UNCTAD, has been working on e-commerce at the time and now more broadly digital economy since 1997, so almost 30 years. And what we can say upfront is that digital trade is no longer a peripheral policy issues or a luxury of distance market. It is central to economic transformation, competitiveness, regional integration, and inclusion. It is, in a way, the new frontier of Southern African integration and the most powerful tool for structural transformation. We heard earlier the strong words of the SG saying that Africa is a digital gap to fill. And indeed, it is a hope that digital trade can be a leapfrog opportunity, allowing young innovators in Lusaka or women entrepreneurs in Lilongwe to bypass physical infrastructure gaps and sell services around the world. So Simon already said we must be clear. Connectivity is an issue, and without the right legal capacity to allow this kind of trade, this only can deepen inequalities. So while SADC nations are making progress in building digital foundation, I think Simon's presentation was quite enlightening regarding this. The critical challenge we observed in Africa as UNCTAD is not the lack of strategy, but it's the lack in implementation. So as parliamentarians, your mandate is to move beyond cables and clouds, to enact the smart, harmonized regulations that build the consumer trust. And this is necessary for a unified African market. So today I will outline in my presentation basically global trends, but I think that African trends were mostly dealt with in the presentation by Simon. And most importantly, how UNCTAD is supporting Africa in moving from diagnostic to the implementation, to the actual delivery. Let me see if I can move my slide. You see only the first slide, right?
We can see the first slide.
Yeah. Don't know why it's not moving now when I'm clicking. Let me see again. Okay, here we go. So globally, digital trade has become a major engine of economic activities. In 2022, global e-commerce sales reached approximately 27 trillion US dollars, representing a significant share of global GDP. However, as we know, these gains are not evenly distributed, and the market concentration between US and China is very well known. Countries with strong digital infrastructure, clear legal frameworks, and effective institutions can, capture value. Those with lower digital readiness risk falling further behind. So the digital divide today is not only about connectivity, it's about participation in value chain, it's about productive capacity. I think, the point made by the SG on what do we produce and for which market is very important. It is also favoring access to market and economic resilience. So for SADC region, the question is not whether digital trade matters, but how to ensure that the region captures the value of the global growth. In terms of digitally delivered service, in total services export throughout the period 2020-2023, Africa share remains low, hovering around 18 to 27%, with only a marginal growth over time. The 2020 spike reflects a drop in travel and services transport due to the COVID, and it is not representing a surge in digital exports. These trends reflect structural constraints such as weak digital infrastructure, low ICT capacity, limited digital skills, and minimal export diversification. Sorry, I don't know why I have trouble moving from one slide to another. Sorry about that. Okay. Technology is not always on our side, as we know. So, what is the link between the ACFTA and and digital trade? Well, as you know, digital trade is central to the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, in particular the Digital Trade Protocol, which requires legal alignment across member states, cross-border payment systems, data governance frameworks, and coordinated implementation mechanism. And this is an historic opportunity for Africa. However, while the political ambition is strong, the implementation capacity remains uneven across the continent. Many countries have adopted strategies and made commitments, but translating those commitments into operational reforms remains challenging and varies around countries. And this is where the national legislatures play a decisive role, ensuring that laws are aligned, budgets are allocated, and oversight mechanisms are effective. So if we look at UNCTAD's role in improving the digital economy for inclusive and sustainable development, we have basically three pillars we're working on. So on research and analysis, with some flagship report, the Digital Economy Report, which will become the Digital Economy and Innovation Report to be launched next year, and that will be on inclusivity. We have also a very important element, it is the statistics on e-commerce and digital economy, and we are working among several partners, including ECA, to help countries measure what exactly e-commerce represents, because we hardly have any figures for many regions, actually. Then we have a pillar on technical assistance that I'm responsible of. And within those programs, we will mostly focus on the e-trade readiness assessment, the implementation support, and the e-commerce and law reform as well program that might be relevant for this meeting. And we have also a consensus building pillar where we basically organize annual meetings on e-commerce and the digital economy, the next one being in May, and will focus on taxation and e-commerce. We have a working group on measuring e-commerce and the digital economy, and the e-trade for initiative that was created 10 years ago, actually, that includes 35 partners, including, of course, ECA, but the World Bank, WTO, ITC, all the organizations that basically help, in a way, countries to shape e-commerce and digital economy. And this was created in a way of, maximizing the synergy among those organizations. So let's turn to UNCTAD support in respect of the digital economy and e-commerce. So far, we have conducted 41 e-trade readiness assessments. Those are basically assessments that look at 7 pillars from the coordination of e-commerce, because e-commerce is cross-cutting theme among various institutions. We look at the infrastructure part, the trade facilitation and logistics, the payment side, the legal infrastructure, of course, available, the skills, and also very important, the financing of entrepreneurs, which is still an area of progress in many regions, including in Africa. So we have done 20 African ET ready and also 2 regionals in WAMU and ECOWAS. And we have conducted 6 in SADC, in Lesotho, Madagascar, Malawi, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. We have currently pending requests from Comoros, Congo, DRC, and Namibia. And these assessments really provide evidence for legislative reforms. Most of the time, the focal point we have is also the focal point that is looking into the digital trade protocol implementation, or the ACFTA implementation overall. So we make these linkages, and these assessments have become a tool also for them to negotiate in various space, not only the ACFTA, and provide the necessary information to then, prepare some strategy. So in terms of strategy, we have conducted 18 national strategies, or policies, or action plans, depending on the willingness of the countries to plan for these policy documents. 10 were in Africa, 2 in SADC, in Botswana and Malawi. And in this region, we still have requests pending from Namibia and Zimbabwe. One important point here, and I will come back to that later, is that all the strategies are good, but if they are just adopted without the necessary budget allocations, then they will remain in the book, which is not what countries and partners want. So one regional strategy was done at the ECOWAS level. It was adopted in July 2023 and currently being implemented with the support of several partners. And as we know, those regional strategies are key for accelerating national reforms as well. We haven't got any request in the SADC to undertake such a work. We have also helped the EAC while they were preparing their strategy. It was more like an advisory role that we had. So based on the fact that we understand that this strategy, national, regional, need to be implemented, we have created the implementation support mechanism with basically 2 main outputs, I would say. First is the regular implementation reviews, and we will turn to this later, that inform, of progress made by countries, that allows also to share lessons. And we do that also with regular focal points meeting. We just had one couple of, 2 weeks ago, to present the latest implementation review. And it's important to keep this community of focal points actively involved and sharing experience. We have also, even more recently, developed the e-trade reform tracker. That's a tool that helps countries monitor the implementation of reforms. And this tool has been adopted by 6 countries, of which 2 African, and we have a request from Zimbabwe. Here again, it doesn't want to work, so let's do the trick. Sorry about that again. Okay. So in terms of implementation, I was mentioning just this publication that was released recently. The real bottleneck is implementation. And what we witness across the many countries we are working with is that there's clearly a weak institutional coordination. So most of the time the Ministry of Trade are not in power, do not have sufficient resources when it comes to implementing. And since e-commerce involves many ministries, there's a lot of coordination that needs to be done. For this, we, in principle, create or ask the country to create a specific task force designed for just e-commerce and digital economy. Sometimes it exists, but we reinforce it by adding members, including the private sector. Private sector is key in e-commerce development and digital trade development. What we see also is there's a limited technical capacity. The topic is not often of digital trade, not often, well known in its various components. And there's, of course, financing constraints that we know, and fragmented monitoring system, meaning that once you have a strategy and it expires after 5 years, when you ask yourself, what have we done? It's often a difficulty starting with that. And it's difficult not to have those results to prepare for the next strategy. So we see the value of the e-trade reform tracker to help country monitor the progress at the national and regional level. Sometimes, of course, there are overlapping mandates. There's, in many countries, new ministry on digital economy or digital at large, and competition, sometimes with Ministry of Trade. So that is also a point that is illustrated into this report with several examples of countries that have managed to overcome these obstacles. I was mentioning earlier this implementation support, so I will not go in depth in this slide. We really want to help countries, not only in the preparation of those strategies and reports, but also in making sure that they are connected to the different partners in the region. So a lot of our work actually is focusing on, making this match between donors and countries. And we do that through the UN resident coordinator offices that were created for that purpose, actually to improve coordination. So I would like now just to turn a little bit on the SADC data that we have been able to gather. Again, Simon provided a lot of data at the African level, which was already very good. In terms of infrastructure, what we see is that there's a bit of connectivity paradox in the region. We see mobile penetration at 60%, but there's only 40% using internet and going online. So we know that the high data costs and rural gaps remain the most significant obstacles in creating a digital economy. The effective deployment also of universal service funds is essential to make internet access more public utility that reaches, remote areas at an accessible price. UNCTAD also observes bold movement to call this gap. We see Malawi, for instance, is currently laying some fiber optical cable to connect schools and government offices by 2030. Zambia also is modernizing its ID digital public infrastructure. We know also that satellite-based connectivity is expanding in many countries and regions, and that will, of course, improve internet access and support also access to digital services, agriculture, and financial inclusion. Well, in terms of digital payment, 58% of adults in sub-Saharan Africa now hold a financial account, and this is the highest growth rate globally, driven by a 40% mobile money adoption rate. Mobile money remains a regional strength, and the transition to cross-border trade is already accelerating as well. Zambia and Zimbabwe onboarded the Pan-African payment settlement systems in 2023 that allow enabling real-time trade in local currencies. But to scale these successes, again, legal frameworks must keep pace. We encourage, of course, the enactment of modernized payment laws and financial consumer protection to ensure that MSMEs and customers alike can participate safely in both domestic and cross-border trade. So if we look at the legal framework, I think, again, Simon went in great details. We see that national frameworks are being updated in some countries, like Malawi with the Data Protection Act. We see also in Zambia, there's efforts to identify regulatory gaps, overlaps, and establish online registry for e-commerce businesses. So we see progress in regional harmonization to promote this regulatory coherence that is necessary to facilitate cross-border trade. We see also AI governance emerging, with national AI strategy being adopted or under development, for instance, in Zambia. And again, parliamentarians here have a key role to play to ensure this legal coherence, the alignment with regional commitments, and the effective enforcement mechanism. This is some data that are taken from the UNCTAD Cyber Law Tracker. And we can see here, I've just put SADC data, Africa, and global data. Well, as we see, SADC is doing pretty good compared to the average in Africa. But the main point here, and it was made by Simon as well, we have to look at how those laws are, up to date or not. And also at the regional level, is there any kind of harmonization? And that includes, of course, with now the CFTA harmonization that is required. So I suppose this is a priority for now, to look at how we can help in harmonizing, updating those laws. And we are actually doing that also at UNCTAD. Just to mention, this is not linked to the CFTA. And I think it's only Mauritius that is part of the WTO GSI on e-commerce. But we have been doing some kind of compliance assessment for the Gambia, for instance, and have requests in other regions. So, this mapping of, regional or multilateral agreements is also needed to make sure that the laws are allowing digital trade effectively. So now let's turn to my last slide on, what is needed. Of course, we talk about the connectivity, we talk about the legal, but most importantly is empowering people to be able to basically enter the market, so entrepreneurs mostly. And this is, we see in many countries, not in the region, but there's, more and more digital education is included into digital international curricula. We see many innovation hubs popping and some programs for young entrepreneurs. We see startups to frame this legally, an innovation fund, as some example in Zambia with the Dicta Innovation Program. We see also a demand for AI-related skills, so that is something that we need to be planted as soon as possible. And also looking more specifically at women entrepreneurs. We have just released a study that could be interested for you to look at. What we know is basically women entrepreneurs face difficulties to especially gather funding for building their own businesses. That is a real barrier for women. So now let's turn at what works basically from our research. And that's not surprising to see here. The first on the list is really to have a clear leadership for digital trade. Unless countries have this as a priority, then it will remain a secondary issue, and e-commerce and digital trade will not flourish. Mentioned earlier, the need to have this coordination at the ministry level, and that includes a lot of stakeholders. The public and private sector is dialogue is super important. There's a need also to promote this regional cooperation. As I said, countries are not now, playing in isolation, but they need to know how digital trade can operate at the regional, sub-regional, and global level. And again, the importance of monitoring the reform is super important, as it is in all areas, not only to digital. Then that's my last slide for you, honorable parliamentarians, because your role is really decisive. It's decisive for strengthening legislative digital framework, for ensuring sustainable financing, for exercises the oversight, the effective oversight. You are entitled also to demand measurable reform tracking. You have a key role in promoting SADC harmonization, align national reform with the ACFTA. And with all these efforts that will allow, more population to be included into the digital economy, there will be more exports of MSMEs across SADC and beyond. That will facilitate payment, cross-border payments, and supported by harmonized legal framework, and hopefully to have a young, tech-savvy entrepreneurship flourishing in the region. So with that, I would like to, thank you for your attention and be available, of course, if there is any question following that presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Cecile. May we give her a round of applause, please, for the beautiful presentation. I particularly loved the last slide on members of parliament's role, the precise role for members of parliament to take home, strengthening legislative digital frameworks, ensuring sustainable financing, exercising effective oversight. The harmonization of regulations across SADC is also critical for the AFCFTA success. We also saw the issues of data governance and frameworks. She also talked about youth-led tech entrepreneurship, seamless cross-border payments, and alignment, which is important, alignment of national reforms with the African continental free trade areas, and also tracking of the protocol with our own national laws. Thank you so much, Cecile, for that important presentation. We'll now move forward, honorable members, with any questions, if you may have any questions. for both presentations. You can, in the React icon, there's a raise a hand icon there. You can click that, or you can also in the chat box write your question. That's how we'll interact. Thank you so much. I see a hand from our director, Mr. Shuneni. Please go ahead, Director.
Thank you very much, Masenate, and I join you in appreciating the submissions from colleagues, and there is no debate in terms of the value, particularly to the members at this juncture. And whilst I was presenting it, I was reminded of the fact that we a few years back, he had embarked on a process of developing a SADC model law on the digital economy. And part of the motivation for that are, in essence, some of the issues you raised, especially, and which were identified as the bottlenecks, including the inadequate infrastructure, data infrastructure, issues of energy deficiencies, the cost of devices and data itself, large digital skills, and the fragmented and outdated digital regulation, and weak data governance. And I think from your submission with the examples of the member states that you have done work in, it would appear to me, and I want to hear from you as practitioners and experts who are currently working in the field. Would an initiative such as that, the model law on digital economy, be an opportunity to leverage efforts to address some of these issues, particularly the issue of the harmonization of data laws and the digital market integration? Would from your standpoint, do you see any prospective value in terms of such an initiative from the SADC Parliamentary Forum, or you think the objectives or the rationale for model law, some of the issues may have been addressed by the situation, based on the situation that's on the ground currently? I would really benefit from your view in terms of that initiative. And I also like the fact that you were quite pointed in terms of what parliaments can and must do. And these conversations are coming at a time when SADC PF, in the process of being transformed to become a parliament, we are also quite pointed in terms of the value add that parliamentarians should make to the regional integration process, particularly through the domestication of protocols. I submit. Thank you.
Do you want me to start responding?
Yes, I don't see any other hand. Please go ahead, madam.
Okay. Well, I think this is a very valid question. You know, what we see in different regions is a lot of agreements all over the place, and then just to cite, for instance, the ASEAN, they have like members, or some ASEAN members are members of other agreements, And if you look at, how to consolidate, how to harmonize, then you have to study about the 10 agreements that they are part of. So, and there's a tendency, I would say, to make additional model laws. The Commonwealth, I think 9 members of the SADC are members of the Commonwealth. And there's a new model law on digital trade that was launched like a couple of weeks ago by the Commonwealth. So I think before trying to make a decision whether it's good or not to have a model law for SADC, it's important to have this mapping of, what kind of agreement we want to be part. What is exactly, you have the ACFTA, so this is already a given. But you may, have a look at the model law from the Commonwealth. I know that there's another organization, DCO, and I don't remember how many members. They have only 18 members, but maybe one of yours is member of that. I could have a look later. But the proliferation of laws is not always good. So first, look at the agreements you are part of. Look at the regional framework that you have already. Is it compliant with the ACFTA protocol? And I would say second would be to start building capacity as well, because it's nice to have laws, but in many cases the capacity is not there. So we've seen with our work on the legal side, there's difficulties for parliamentarians to write those laws because they are not fully aware of all the issues. And at the ministry level, they don't have the capacity. So it's a complex matter. I'm a jurist by training, so I know what I'm talking about. It's very complex. And the third important point is you have international standards, I would say, like the UNCTAD model laws on e-commerce. So don't try to reinvent what exists. So identify those standards that can make sense in your reflection, and that's it. So these 3 points: map what exists already and what agreement you're part of, build the capacity, and also look at the international tools that exist. And I will stop at that. I hope this is helpful.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. Melville has an intervention.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I just wanted to complement what Cecilia said. I fully agree with her. I think there is a lot that already exists that needs to be ratified. Is that not the case? And then, of course, enforced. I think Cecile was talking about implementation. This is really key, and as she also said, it requires building capacities to ensure that that can be implemented. I just wanted to mention the fact that also in the same vein, there is a lot of existing. Of course, there might be value to complement what exists to fill certain gaps, but there are also risks. I think Cécile mentioned some of them, but in the context of the AFCFTA, the risk that I see is that if you adopt model law at regional levels, then you will create some imbalances across the continent. And yes, you might actually be able to trade much better within the SADC region, but you may face some limitations when you want to trade outside. So I think that has also to be taken into consideration. The digital trade protocol is a good framework. Of course, there is a lot to implement. It might feel overwhelming. This is why I was trying to show in the presentation that there are some priorities areas that may be worth focusing on. I would invite actually you to look at the website. I provided the address on one of the slides. We do in fact have a segment within the Africa section where we have countries and there we bring out the key issues, challenges and opportunities for each of the countries, including around the issue that Mr. Chanini has raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interventions. Do we have any more questions or interventions on our members? I don't see any more hands. That's 4. I think that would bring us to the end of the training session. At this point, I would like to thank honorable members for joining in on this 4th session of the UNCTAD SADC PF training. Thank you to the SG for gracing us kindly with their presence, to the UNCTAD for coming in with the training and the training materials. Thank you kindly for joining us. Also to the presenters, thank you very much kindly for sharing with us what you had today. Thank you everybody for joining, ladies and gentlemen. The session has come to an end.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
everyone.
Yes. Nice to see you, Simon.
Likewise, Cécile. Bonne fin de journée.
Bonne fin de journée, and have a good rest of the day for all of you. I'm very proud to have been able to contribute. I hope it was useful.
Thank you, Cecile.